They mocked Earth at the Council. By dawn, humanity the galaxy froze. When the Terran fleet arrived, the great chamber of the Galactic Council sat at the heart of the Lumen Spire, a massive station built long before humans had learned to write. Its walls were made of a silver metal that never rusted and never aged. Lights floated in the air without wires, and the ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top of the room. Every important species in the galaxy had a seat here. Every species except one had earned their place through strength, numbers, or ancient history. Earth was the newest member. Earth was also the smallest, the youngest, and by far the most mocked. Ambassador Elena Voss stood at the human podium, a small raised platform near the back of the chamber. She wore a simple gray uniform with a small blue patch on the shoulder, a circle with a single dot in the middle. It was Earth's symbol, chosen 10 years ago when the planet had finally been allowed to send a representative to this place. Elena was not young. She had gray in her hair and lines on her face from years of stress, but her back was straight, and her eyes did not move away when the other delegates stared at her. And they were staring now. "Let me understand this correctly," said Councillor Threx, his voice sharp and cold. He was Drachnul, a species that looked like tall reptiles standing on two legs, with dark green scales and yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. He led one of the largest fleets in the galaxy, and he never let anyone forget it. "Your species has existed as a spacefaring civilization for what, 60 years? And you wish to have a permanent seat at this council, with full voting rights?" "That is correct," Elena said calmly. A wave of quiet laughter moved through the chamber. Not loud laughter, the kind of laughter that hurt more because it was polite, controlled, the kind that said, "We do not even think you are worth a real reaction." Threx's mouth curled into something like a smile, though on his reptile face it looked more like a snarl. "Councillor Voss, with respect, the Solon Collective has existed for 11,000 years. The Veora walked between stars, while your ancestors were still living in caves and fighting each other with sticks. And you ask us to treat your single, fragile planet as an equal?" "We are not asking to be treated as more than we are," Elena said. "We are asking to be treated fairly, based on what we can offer, not based on how long we have existed." "Fairly," Threx repeated, tasting the word like it was strange to him. "Tell me, Ambassador, in 60 years, how many wars has your species fought among itself?" Elena did not answer right away. She knew where this was going. She had been in this chamber many times before, and every time, someone brought up Earth's past. "Many," she said honestly. "We do not hide from our history." "2 world wars," Threx said, turning to address the rest of the council now, his voice rising like he was performing for them. "Countless smaller wars. A history of violence stretching back thousands of years before you even reached space. And now this young, violent, unstable species wishes to sit among civilizations that have known peace for millennia." "Peace enforced by fear of your fleets," said a quiet voice from another section of the chamber. It belonged to Ambassador Kess of the Veora, a slender being with pale blue skin and large black eyes, one of the few delegates who had shown Earth any kindness since it joined the council. "Let us not pretend the galaxy has always been gentle, Councillor Threx." Threx waved a clawed hand dismissively. "That is not the point, Ambassador Kess. The point is that this species has not earned its place. It has been given a gift, a seat at this table, and it has not yet proven it deserves to keep it." The chamber murmured again. Elena looked around at the different delegates. Some looked bored, some looked amused. A few, like Kess, looked uncomfortable with what was happening but said nothing more. This was how it always went. Earth was tolerated, barely, and used as an easy target whenever someone needed to look strong in front of the council. "Councillor Threx," Elena said, her voice steady, "Earth has fulfilled every requirement asked of it since joining this council. We have shared our medical research freely. We have contributed ships to the joint patrol fleets, guarding the trade lanes near our territory. We have broken no laws and started no conflicts with any member species." "Contributed ships," Threx said, and this time, several other delegates laughed openly. "Ambassador, your species has perhaps 200 warships in total. The Drachnul alone maintained 12,000. Your contribution to the joint fleet is Forgive me. A joke that even my youngest hatchlings would find beneath them. Elena felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice level. Size is not the only measure of strength, Counselor. No, Threx agreed, his yellow eyes narrowing. But it is a very important one. Tell me, Ambassador, what would your species do if the Draco decided your planet was no longer welcome among the stars? What would you do if I brought my fleet to your home system tomorrow? The chamber went quiet. This was more than mockery now. This was closer to a threat, spoken carefully so it could later be denied as one, but a threat all the same. Elena looked at Threx for a long moment. Around the chamber, delegates leaned forward slightly, curious to see how the young ambassador would respond to such a bold challenge. Some hoped she would break down. Some hoped she would beg. A few, quietly, hoped she would surprise them. I would suggest, Elena said slowly, that you reconsider such an action very carefully. Threx laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Is that a threat, little ambassador? It is a warning, Elena said. There is a difference. Enlighten me on the difference then, Threx said, spreading his clawed hands wide, playing to the crowd of watching delegates. Because from where I stand, your species has a fleet of 200 outdated ships, no significant alliances beyond your own solar system, and a habit of fighting itself more than it fights anyone else. What warning could you possibly give the Dracnil Dominion? Elena's eyes moved briefly toward Kess, who was watching her closely, and then back to Threx. She thought of Admiral Marcus Hale, sitting right now in a command chair somewhere far from this chamber, watching this entire exchange through a secure feed. She thought of the years of quiet work, the sacrifices, the secrets kept even from most of humanity's own government. She thought of what was coming, and she allowed herself, just for a moment, a small and calm smile. You assume, she said, that what you see is all there is to see. The chamber fell silent at that. Threx tilted his head, his yellow eyes narrowing further, some instinct in his reptile brain picking up on something in her tone that did not match the confidence of a species about to be crushed. Explain yourself, he said, his voice losing a little of its earlier mockery. I have said what I came to say, Elena replied. Earth requests to remain a full member of this council, with equal voting rights, as agreed under the original charter of our membership. If the council wishes to challenge that agreement, it may do so formally, through proper procedure. Threats made in this chamber, Councillor Threx, will be remembered. Is that so? Threx said, recovering some of his earlier arrogance. And what will your species do? Remember it very hard. Write it down somewhere? More laughter followed, though it was thinner this time, less confident than before. Something in Elena's calm had unsettled a few of the delegates, even if they could not say exactly why. The council's presiding officer, an ancient being of the Korath species named Vezek, finally spoke. Vezek looked like a great insect standing upright, with 6 thin limbs and a face covered in small black eyes. His voice, when it came, was slow and measured, the voice of someone who had watched 1,000 arguments unfold in this chamber over centuries of service. This session grows heated, Vezek said. Councillor Threx, your point has been made. Ambassador Voss, your response has been noted. We will move to the next item on the agenda. Threx did not sit down immediately. He looked at Elena a moment longer, something calculating behind his yellow eyes, before finally returning to his seat with a small, satisfied huff, as though he believed he had won something important. Elena remained standing at her podium a moment longer than necessary. She glanced once more around the chamber, at the many species who ruled the galaxy through age, numbers, and fear. Then she reached up and touched a small device on her wrist, no larger than a coin, and sent a single short message through a secure channel that no scanner in this chamber could detect. The message was simple, 3 words. Proceed as planned. Far away, in the cold dark between stars, something enormous began to move. Admiral Marcus Hale sat in the command chair of the ISS Dawnbringer, humanity's newest and largest warship, though the delegates in that chamber did not know it existed yet. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with short gray hair and tired eyes that had seen more than most people would ever know. On the screen in front of him, he had just watched the entire exchange from the council chamber, relayed through a hidden channel built into Ambassador Voss's communicator. "They really do think we're nothing," said Captain Rinose, his second-in-command, standing beside his chair. She was younger, sharp-eyed, her arms crossed as she watched the recording freeze on Threx's mocking face. "Let them think it a little longer," Marcus said quietly. "It won't matter after tonight." Behind him, through the massive viewport of the Dawnbringer's bridge, thousands of ships floated in perfect formation across the dark of space. Some were sleek and fast, built for speed and precision strikes. Others were massive, slow giants, built to carry enough firepower to level a moon if it ever came to that. All of them had been built in secret, piece by piece, over the past 15 years, hidden in shipyards constructed deep in the asteroid belt and beyond, far from any prying eyes, alien or human. The galaxy believed Earth had 200 outdated warships. The galaxy did not know about the other 4,000. "Message just came through from Ambassador Voss," said the communications officer, a young woman named Sato. "Confirmed. Proceed as planned." Marcus nodded slowly. He thought about his grandfather who had told him stories of the first contact, decades ago, when a Veora scout ship had entered Earth's solar system and humanity had realized, for the first time, that it was not alone in the universe, and that it was very, very small compared to everyone else out there. He thought about the years that followed, the fear, the scrambling to catch up, the endless meetings where humanity had been talked down to, dismissed, treated as a curiosity rather than a civilization. He thought about the quiet decision made by Earth's governments, years ago, to stop trying to prove themselves through words in a council chamber, and instead, prove themselves through actions no one could argue with. "Set course for the Lumen system," Marcus said. "Full fleet, quiet running, until we reach the edge of their sensor range. Then light up everything." "Yes, sir," said the helm officer. "How long until we arrive?" Captain Osei asked. Marcus looked at the star charts glowing softly on the display before him, calculating the distance in his head out of old habit, even though the ship's computer had already given him the exact number. "By dawn," he said. "Local time at the Lumen Spire. We arrive by dawn." Behind him, thousands of engines began to hum to life, one by one, like a great sleeping giant slowly waking up after a very long rest. The Terran fleet was moving, and nothing in the galaxy would ever look at Earth the same way again. Elsewhere on the Lumen Spire, in a smaller meeting room reserved for lower-ranking staff, David Chen sat with two other human aides, watching a replay of the council session on a small screen. David was young, only 26, and this was his first posting away from Earth. He had grown up hearing stories about first contact from his parents, who remembered the fear and confusion of those early years, but he had never truly understood what it felt like to sit inside that chamber and watch his own species be talked down to so openly. "They do this every time," said one of the other aides, a woman named Priya, who had served on the station for almost 4 years. "It's always the same. Threx or someone like him makes a comment about our history. Someone laughs, and Ambassador Voss just stands there and takes it." "She doesn't just take it," David said. "She answers every point. She never backs down." "Answering isn't the same as being heard," Priya said, though not unkindly. "I've watched 100 sessions like this one. Nothing ever really changes. We're the newest member, and will probably still be treated as the newest member 50 years from now." David frowned, thinking about the strange calm he had seen on Elena's face after her private message with the soldiers outside the council chamber. It wasn't the look of someone who expected nothing to change. It was the look of someone who knew something the rest of them didn't. "I don't think that's true anymore," David said quietly. "I think something is different this time." Priya raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" David hesitated. He had signed agreements, like everyone posted to the Lumen Spire, promising not to discuss certain classified matters, even with fellow humans who lacked proper clearance. But he had seen enough small signs over the past year, encrypted communications routed through unusual channels, brief mentions of fleet exercises that never appeared in any public record, quiet visits from military officials who never explained their purpose, to suspect that Earth's government was hiding something far larger than anyone realized. "Just a feeling," he said finally. Ambassador Voss seemed prepared today, like she expected exactly what Threx was going to say, and exactly how she wanted to answer it. Priya shrugged, unconvinced. She's a good diplomat. That's her job, to stay calm no matter what they throw at her. David said nothing more, but he kept turning the moment over in his mind, the way Elena had looked at Threx and said, "You assume that what you see is all there is to see." It had not sounded like the words of someone simply trying to save face. It had sounded like a promise. Back aboard the Dawnbringer, deep within the ship's lower decks, a young engineer named Officer Tomas Reyes made his final rounds through the ship's massive engine room before his shift ended. The room stretched 3 full decks high, filled with the soft hum of engines that had taken nearly a decade to design and build in secret shipyards hidden among the asteroids beyond Mars. Tomas had been part of the fleet program since he was 19 years old, recruited straight out of engineering school by a government official who explained only that he would be working on a classified project of great importance to Earth's future. He remembered the shock of seeing the hidden shipyards for the first time, an entire industrial complex hollowed out inside a large asteroid, invisible to any casual observer, capable of producing warships far faster than anyone believed possible. "Everything steady down here?" asked his supervisor, a stern woman named Chief Engineer Okafor, as she walked past on her own inspection round. "All steady, Chief," Tomas said. "Engine output holding at 94% efficiency. Should be more than enough for the approach." Okafor nodded, satisfied, though her expression remained tense. 10 years of secrecy, all coming down to the next 12 hours. "Do you ever regret it?" Tomas asked. "Keeping it hidden this long? My family still thinks I work for a mining survey company. I haven't been able to tell them the truth in 7 years." Okafor was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it." She looked around at the massive engine room, at the quiet, powerful machinery that surrounded them. "When I was a girl, I watched footage of the first council session Earth was ever invited to attend. I watched delegates from a dozen species laugh at our representative, right there on camera, for the entire world to see. I decided that day I wanted to help make sure that never happened again, not because we threatened anyone, but because no one would ever again think they safely could." Tomas nodded slowly, understanding settling over him in a way it hadn't quite before. "By dawn," he said quietly, echoing the words that had been spreading through the fleet ever since the order came down. "By dawn," Okafor agreed, a small, tired smile crossing her face. "Get some rest, Tomas. Long day ahead." As Tomas left the engine room and made his way toward the crew quarters, he thought about all the years of secrecy, the sacrifices made by so many people across Earth who had chosen to build something extraordinary without ever seeking recognition for it. Somewhere far above him, on the bridge of the Dawnbringer, Admiral Hale was making the final calculations for their approach. Somewhere far ahead of them, in a chamber full of aliens who thought they understood exactly what humanity was capable of, Ambassador Voss was waiting for the moment when all of it would finally be revealed. The fleet moved on through the dark, silent, and patient, carrying with it the weight of a decade and a half of hidden effort, sacrifice, and hope. The dawn was still far away, but for the first time in a very long while, it felt close enough to believe in. They mocked Earth at the Council. By dawn, humanity the galaxy froze, when the Terran fleet arrived. After the Council session ended, Ambassador Elena Voss walked through the long silver halls of the Lumen Spire toward her private quarters. The station never seemed to sleep. Delegates from 100 different species moved through its corridors at all hours, some walking, some floating, some crawling along the walls in ways that still made human observers uneasy after all these years. Nobody bothered to greet her as she passed. That was normal. She was used to it. What was not normal was the group of 3 Drachnol soldiers waiting near the entrance to the human section of the station. They wore dark battle armor, though weapons were technically forbidden inside the council chamber's outer ring. Drachnol soldiers rarely followed that rule closely, and no one ever stopped them. The one in front had scars across his snout, and his yellow eyes fixed on Elena the moment she came into view. "Ambassador Voss," he said, his voice low and rough. "Counselor Threx sends his regards." "Does he?" Elena said, stopping a few steps away, refusing to show any nervousness, even though her heart had begun beating faster. "He wanted you to know," the soldier continued, "that the Dominion does not make idle threats. Perhaps you should reconsider your species' place at this council, before matters become difficult." "Is that a message from the council?" Elena asked. "Or a private threat from Counselor Threx?" The soldier smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Does it matter?" "It matters a great deal," Elena said. "One is a diplomatic statement. The other is a war crime under the Council's own charter, committed on Council territory by a member species military officer. I wonder which one you meant." The soldier's smile faded slightly. He had clearly expected fear, not a calm reminder of law. "Watch your tone, human." "I always do," Elena said. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have reports to file." She walked past them without waiting for a response, her back straight, her steps steady, though inside her stomach twisted with tension. She did not look back until she reached the human section and the doors closed behind her. Only then did she let out a long breath. Her aide, a young man named David Chen, was waiting inside, his face pale. "I saw the whole thing on the internal cameras," he said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Elena said. "Threx is trying to scare us. It's what bullies do when their words stop working." "Do you think he'll actually attack Earth?" Elena walked to the window, looking out at the vast darkness of space beyond the station, dotted with distant stars, and the lights of a dozen other alien vessels docked nearby. "I think Threx wants to be the one who finally puts humanity in its place. He's wanted that since we joined the Council. Today, in front of everyone, he as good as promised it." "Then we need to warn Earth," David said. "Warn the fleet." "The fleet already knows," Elena said quietly. "It has known for years that this day might come." David blinked, confused, not fully understanding what she meant. Elena did not explain further. Very few people outside of Earth's highest command structure knew the full truth about what humanity had built in secret over the past decade and a half. It was safer that way. Secrets were easier to keep when fewer people carried them. 200 light-years away, aboard the ISS Dawnbringer, the Terran fleet moved through the dark of space in careful, disciplined silence. Every ship ran with minimal power signatures, engines dampened, sensors passive only, listening rather than broadcasting. It was a technique humanity had developed after years of studying how larger, more advanced species detected ships across long distances. If the Drachnol or any other Council species had scanned this region of space right now, they would have seen almost nothing. A faint shimmer, easily mistaken for background radiation, nothing more. Admiral Marcus Hale walked the length of the Dawnbringer's bridge, checking status reports from different sections of the fleet. Behind him, Captain Rin Osei studied a tactical display showing the full formation, thousands of ships spread across a wide area of space, moving together like a slow, silent tide. "Fleet cohesion is holding at 98%, Osei reported. A few ships in the outer screen are running slightly behind formation, but nothing significant." "Good," Marcus said. "Keep them tight. We don't get a second chance to make this entrance." "Do you think they'll actually believe it when they see us?" Osei asked. 4,000 ships appearing out of nowhere. "It's going to look impossible to them." Marcus allowed himself a small, tired smile. "That's rather the point, Captain." He thought back to the early years, when the fleet had first begun, as little more than a desperate idea whispered between exhausted engineers and worried generals. After first contact, humanity had quickly learned two important truths. First, that the galaxy was far larger, older, and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Second, that most of the older species judged worth by strength, and strength, in their eyes, meant numbers, and numbers meant fleets. Earth could not match the Drachnol ship for ship, or the Solon Collective's advanced technology point for point. What Earth could do, however, was something the older species had mostly forgotten how to do after thousands of years of peace and slow, careful growth. Earth could move fast. Human engineers, freed from ancient traditions and rigid ways of thinking, had taken alien technology shared during the early years of contact, technology the older species considered basic and unremarkable, and improved it in ways that surprised even the scientists who had shared it. Human industry, driven by urgency and a healthy dose of fear, had built shipyards faster than any species in recorded history, hidden deep in asteroid fields and behind the cover of ordinary mining operations. Human governments, usually so divided and quarrelsome, had found, for the first time in generations, a common cause large enough to unite them. The result was a fleet the galaxy did not know existed, a fleet built not to conquer, but to make absolutely certain that no one would ever again look at Earth and think it was helpless. "Sir," Sato called from the communication station, "we're picking up a coded burst transmission from Ambassador Voss. Priority channel." "Put it through," Marcus said. Elena's voice came through, quiet and controlled, though Marcus could hear the tension underneath it. "Marcus, Threx sent soldiers to threaten me, directly after the session. It wasn't subtle. I believe he intends to make good on his threat against Earth, possibly sooner than we expected." Marcus's jaw tightened. "How soon?" "I don't know for certain," Elena said, "but given his behavior today, I would not assume we have much time. If the Drack'll move first, everything changes." "Understood," Marcus said. "We're already en route. Nothing changes on our end, except perhaps our patience for waiting until dawn." There was a pause on the line. "You could arrive sooner," Elena said. "You have the fleet within reach of a jump gate, closer to the Lumen system." "We could," Marcus agreed, "but arriving now, in the middle of the night cycle, half prepared, without the Council fully assembled to witness it, would waste the entire point of this. We need every delegate in that chamber, awake, watching, when we arrive. We need the galaxy to see us clearly, all at once, not through rumors and confused reports trickling in over hours. And if Threx attacks Earth before then?" Marcus looked at the star charts, then at the timer counting down in the corner of his display. 11 hours until dawn at the Lumen Spire. "Earth's home fleet is not defenseless," he said. "We left enough behind to hold the line if it comes to that. Threx wants a show of strength in front of the Council, not a quiet massacre no one will see. He'll wait, at least a little while, to make sure everyone knows he's the one who did it. That works in our favor. It gives us time." "I hope you're right," Elena said. "So do I," Marcus admitted. "Keep the Council distracted if you can, Elena. Give us until dawn." "I'll do what I can," she said, and the channel closed. Marcus stood quietly for a moment, looking out at the endless dark ahead of the fleet, thinking of Earth, small and blue and impossibly far away, and of the billions of people going about their lives without any idea that today might be the day everything changed. "Sir," Osei said gently, "orders?" Marcus straightened his shoulders. "Signal the fleet. Increase speed by 10%. We hold formation. We hold silence. But we do not waste a single unnecessary minute. Threx wants to threaten a helpless little planet. Let's make sure he understands exactly how wrong he is, at the worst possible moment for him." "Yes, sir," Osei said, already relaying the order. Across the vast formation, thousands of ships adjusted their course slightly, engines humming a fraction louder, the great silent fleet pressing onward through the dark toward the Lumen system, toward a Council that had no idea what was coming, and toward a dawn that would change the galaxy forever. Back on the Lumen Spire, Councillor Threx sat in his private chambers, a room decorated with trophies from old conquests, the skulls of creatures from a dozen worlds he had helped subdue over his long military career. He poured himself a drink of a dark red liquid, thick as syrup, and stared out at the stars beyond his window. His aide, a smaller Drachnol named Vask, entered quietly. "Counselor, the fleet is ready, as you requested. We can depart for the human system within the hour, if you wish." Threx swirled his drink slowly, thinking. "Not yet," he said. "Let the ambassador stew a while longer. Let her wonder when it will happen, whether it will happen. Fear works best slowly, Vask. A quick strike gives no time for despair to properly set in." "As you say, Counselor," Vask said, bowing slightly. "Though I do wonder, did you notice anything strange about her today? She did not react the way we expected." Threx's yellow eyes narrowed slightly at the memory. The ambassador's calm smile, the way she had said, "You assume that what you see is all there is to see." At the time, he had dismissed it as empty bravado, the last defiant words of a species with nothing left to lose. But something about it had stuck with him through the rest of the day, an itch at the back of his mind he could not quite scratch away. "She is desperate," Threx said finally, more to convince himself than Vask. "Desperate creatures often try to sound brave. It means nothing." "Of course, Counselor," Vask said, though he did not sound entirely convinced either. Threx finished his drink in one long swallow and set the glass down hard on the table. "Prepare the fleet for departure at first light," he said. "We will arrive at the human system with plenty of time to make our point before the next council session. Let the galaxy see what happens to species that forget their place." Vask bowed again and left to relay the orders. Threx remained alone in his chambers a while longer, staring out at the stars, that small itch of doubt still sitting uncomfortably in the back of his mind, though his pride would not allow him to fully acknowledge it. Far beyond the edge of his sensors, closer with every passing hour, 4,000 human warships moved silently through the dark, carrying with them the answer to every question he did not yet know he was asking. Dawn was still hours away, but it was coming. In her quarters, Elena finally sat down after David left to check on the human staff working the night shift. She opened a small drawer beside her desk and took out an old photograph, printed on real paper the way her grandmother had always preferred, showing a group of exhausted-looking officials standing together outside a government building on Earth, nearly 2 decades ago. Her grandmother stood among them, younger then than Elena was now, one of the original architects of Earth's response to first contact. Elena remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell, late at night, when Elena was still a girl trying to understand why the adults around her always seemed so worried. Stories about the terror of realizing humanity was not only not alone in the universe, but was staggeringly behind almost every other species, in nearly every measurable way. Stories about desperate meetings between governments that had barely spoken to one another in decades, forced now to cooperate out of pure necessity. Stories about the decision, made quietly and carefully, to build something the rest of the galaxy would never see coming. "You always said patience was our greatest weapon," Elena murmured to the photograph, right alongside whatever the engineers were building in secret. Her grandmother had passed away 6 years ago, never living to see this day, though she had always insisted it would come, one way or another. Elena had inherited not just the photograph, but a set of old handwritten notes, letters really, that her grandmother had left for her, to be opened only when Elena herself joined the diplomatic service. One line from those letters had stayed with Elena through every difficult session in that council chamber, every quiet insult, every moment of doubt. "They will underestimate us for exactly as long as we allow it. Choose carefully when that ends." Elena put the photograph away and turned back to her monitor, checking the fleet's steady progress one more time, before finally allowing herself a short rest. 6 hours remained until dawn. She intended to be fully alert for every one of them. Aboard the Dawnbringer, Admiral Hale walked through the crew quarters during the final hours before contact, something he made a point of doing before any major operation, however large or small. He believed strongly that a commander who never left the bridge quickly lost touch with the people actually carrying out his orders. And tonight, more than any other night in his long career, he wanted his people to know he understood the weight of what they were about to do. He found a young pilot named Ensign Marta Diaz sitting alone in the mess hall, staring at an untouched tray of food. "Mind if I join you?" Marcus asked. Marta startled slightly, clearly not expecting the fleet's admiral to sit down across from her. "Of course, sir." "Sorry, sir, I keep thinking about my parents. They think I've been stationed on a research vessel near Jupiter for the past 3 years. They have no idea what any of this is, what I've actually been doing." "A lot of people are going to have that conversation soon," Marcus said gently. "It won't be easy. Explaining years of silence to the people who love you never is." "Do you think they'll understand?" Marta asked. "Why we couldn't tell them?" Marcus considered the question honestly. "I think some will understand right away. I think others will need time, and some explaining, and maybe some anger worked through before understanding comes. That's fair. We're asking a lot of trust from people who had no say in the decision to keep this secret. Was it the right decision, sir? Keeping it from everyone, even our own families?" "I've asked myself that question more nights than I can count," Marcus admitted. "I still believe it was necessary. Word travels in strange ways, Ensign. If even a rumor of a fleet this size had leaked early, other species might have panicked, seen it as a threat rather than a shield, and reacted before we were ready to explain ourselves properly. Secrecy bought us the time to build something strong enough to finally speak from a position of strength, instead of always negotiating from a position of weakness. That mattered more to me than comfort, even the comfort of honesty with people I love. Marta nodded slowly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. Thank you, sir, for explaining it. Most admirals wouldn't bother. Most admirals didn't spend 15 years building this fleet alongside the people who would eventually crew it, Marcus said, standing. Get some rest if you can, Ensign. Big day ahead. As he continued his walk through the ship, Marcus reflected on how many conversations like this one he had already had, and how many more waited for him after today, not just with his crew, but with the people of Earth itself, who would wake up soon to discover that their planet possessed a military force larger than most had ever imagined, built entirely without most of their knowledge or consent. It was a conversation Earth's leaders had debated for years, weighing the dangers of secrecy against the dangers of the galaxy learning too early what humanity was capable of building. In the end, they had chosen secrecy, gambling that the moment of revelation, carefully chosen and carefully staged, would matter more than the discomfort of the years spent hiding the truth. Marcus intended to make sure that gamble paid off. He returned to the bridge as the ship's clock ticked steadily toward the hour of arrival, the fleet moving ever closer through the dark, carrying with it not just weapons and armor, but the accumulated hope, sacrifice, and quiet determination of an entire species finally ready to be seen clearly, on its own terms, for the very first time. They mocked Earth at the Council. By dawn, humanity the galaxy froze. When the Terran fleet arrived, the night cycle on the Lumen Spire passed slowly for Ambassador Elena Voss. She did not sleep. She sat in her quarters, watching status updates scroll across her private screen, each one a small piece of a much larger plan that had taken 15 years to build. David Chen stayed with her most of the night, bringing coffee that had gone cold twice over, too nervous himself to rest. You should try to sleep, Elena told him around the third hour of the night cycle. Tomorrow will be a long day. I don't think I could if I tried, David admitted. Do you really think it will work? All of it? Elena thought about the question carefully before answering. I think humanity has spent 60 years being told what it is by everyone else. Weak, young, violent, unworthy. I think tomorrow, for the first time, the galaxy is going to find out what we decided to become instead, on our own terms. David managed a small, tired smile. That's a very diplomatic non-answer, Ambassador. I've had a lot of practice, Elena said, and for the first time that night, she almost laughed. Her communicator chimed softly. A private message, coded, from a source she recognized instantly. Kess, the Veora ambassador. Elena, I do not know what is happening, but I have heard rumors tonight of unusual fleet movements near Draknul space, and stranger still, unconfirmed sensor readings from the outer edge of this system. Something large is out there. Is there something you wish to tell me, as a friend, before whatever this is happens? Elena stared at the message for a long moment. Kess had been kind to Earth from the very beginning, one of the few voices in the council who had argued for fairness rather than mockery. She deserved honesty, or at least as much of it as could safely be given. She typed a careful reply. Kess, I cannot tell you everything tonight, but I can tell you this. Nothing that happens tomorrow is meant to harm the Veora, or any species that has treated Earth with respect. Trust me a little longer. By dawn, everything will be clear. The reply came back quickly. I trust you, Elena. I hope that trust is not misplaced. It isn't. Elena wrote back, and meant it. Aboard the ISS Dawnbringer, the fleet continued its silent approach through the dark reaches of space between star systems. Admiral Marcus Hale had not slept either, though he had ordered most of his crew to rotate through rest shifts to keep everyone sharp for what was coming. He stood now in the ship's observation deck, a quiet room near the top of the vessel, with a curved window that showed the stars stretching endlessly in every direction. Captain Rin Osei joined him there, carrying 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, one of the small luxuries the fleet had insisted on bringing along despite the long years of secret preparation. "Thought you could use this," she said, handing him a cup. "Thank you," Marcus said, taking it gratefully. "Any changes in fleet status?" "None. Everyone's holding formation. Engines are running clean. We'll cross into detectable range of the Lumen system's outer sensors in about 6 hours, right on schedule for a dawn arrival." Marcus nodded slowly, sipping his coffee, looking out at the stars. "Do you ever think about how strange this all is, Rin? 60 years ago, we didn't even know for certain we were alone in the universe. Some people hoped we were. Some people were terrified we weren't. And now here we are, commanding the largest fleet humanity has ever built, sneaking through the dark toward a room full of aliens who think we're barely worth noticing." "I think about it every day," Osei admitted. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the early years after first contact, how scared everyone was, how the whole world argued for years about what to do, whether to hide, whether to fight, whether to just give up and accept whatever the aliens decided for us. And instead," Marcus said, "we decided to build something no one asked us to build, and keep it quiet until the day we needed it." "Do you think it was the right choice?" Osei asked. "All those years, all those resources, kept secret, even from most of our own governments. A lot of people back home are going to be shocked tomorrow too, not just the aliens." Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about the question honestly, rather than giving a quick answer. "I think," he said finally, "that a species only gets to decide its own future if it's strong enough to defend that decision. We tried words first, Rin. Ambassador Voss and people like her have spent years in that council chamber, arguing, negotiating, being patient, being reasonable, being mocked for their trouble. Words alone were never going to be enough for a species that thinks the age of your civilization matters more than its choices. So we built something that speaks a language even the oldest species in the galaxy understands. Strength," Osei said quietly. "Strength," Marcus agreed. "Not to conquer, not to threaten first, but to make absolutely certain that no one ever mistakes patience for weakness again." They stood together in silence for a while, watching the stars slide slowly past the window as the great fleet moved onward through the dark. Elsewhere, aboard his own flagship, Counselor Threx prepared for the journey to Earth's solar system. His crew moved with practiced efficiency, loading weapons systems, checking shield generators, preparing for what Threx had told them would be a simple demonstration of strength, a show meant to remind an arrogant young species of its true place in the galaxy. Vask approached him on the bridge, his expression troubled. "Counselor, we have received strange sensor reports from 3 separate outposts along the border of Council space. Large unidentified fleet signatures, moving in tight formation, running dark. The reports are inconsistent and unconfirmed, but ghost readings," Threx said dismissively, not looking up from the tactical display in front of him. "Sensor error most likely, or perhaps some minor species testing new stealth technology and getting nervous when they think we've noticed. It happens more often than you would think." "Perhaps," Vask said, though he did not sound convinced. "Still, given the ambassador's strange behavior yesterday, and now these reports." Threx finally looked up, irritation flashing across his reptilian face. "Vask, the humans have 200 ships, 200 old, slow, poorly armed ships that could not stand against even a single squadron of our fleet. Whatever these sensor ghosts are, they are not a human fleet. The very idea is absurd." "Of course, Counselor," Vask said, bowing his head slightly, though the itch of doubt in his own mind did not fully disappear. Threx turned back to his tactical display, studying the projected course toward Earth's solar system, still hours away. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, imagining the moment his fleet would arrive in the skies above humanity's homeworld, the panic that would spread, the desperate pleas for mercy that would surely follow. It would be a fine story to tell at the next council session, a fitting lesson for any other young species foolish enough to think itself equal to its elders. He had no idea that, at that very moment, the largest fleet ever assembled by human hands was closing the distance toward the Lumen Spire itself, not toward Earth at all, moving with quiet, disciplined purpose toward a destination Threx had never once considered. Back on the Lumen Spire, the night cycle finally began to fade. Soft artificial light crept through the station's corridors, simulating the slow approach of dawn for the benefit of the many species who still kept some version of a day and night schedule out of old habit. Ambassador Elena Voss stood once more at the window of her quarters, watching the darkness outside slowly give way to the pale light that the station generated each morning cycle. David Chen joined her, looking exhausted but alert. "Any word from the fleet?" "They're on schedule," Elena said. 6 hours out, last I heard. Right on time. "And the council session?" "Scheduled to begin at the usual hour, once most of the delegates have finished their morning routines," Elena said, "which should put us right in the middle of the session when the fleet arrives." "Do you think Threx suspects anything?" Elena thought of Kess's message the night before, of the rumors already spreading quietly through the station about strange sensor readings near the border. "I think," she said slowly, "that some of them are beginning to feel something they are not used to feeling." "What's that?" "Uncertainty," Elena said. "For the first time in a very long while, I think some of the oldest species in this galaxy are starting to wonder if they truly understand everything they think they understand." Outside the window, the artificial dawn continued to spread its pale light across the station, and somewhere far beyond the edge of the system's sensors, 4,000 human warships crossed silently into the outer boundary of detectable space, still hidden, still patient, still exactly on schedule. The final hours had begun. By the time the true dawn broke over the lumen spire, nothing in the galaxy would look the same again. While the station slowly woke around them, Kess sat alone in her own quarters, unable to shake the unease that had settled over her since sending that late-night message to Elena. She was Veora, a species known throughout the galaxy for careful thought and patient diplomacy, and she had spent the better part of her long career trying to build bridges between species who often seemed determined to see only differences rather than common ground. She thought back to the day, 10 years ago, when Earth's first ambassador had arrived at the Lumen Spire, nervous and uncertain, facing a council that had already decided, before a single word was spoken, that this new species was beneath serious consideration. Kess remembered feeling sympathy for that first ambassador, an older man named Ambassador Whitfield who had died 3 years into his post, worn down by the constant strain of representing a species nobody respected. Elena had taken his place, younger, sharper, more patient than her predecessor had been able to manage, and Kess had watched her grow into the role with a kind of quiet admiration she rarely felt for anyone. Now, sitting in the pale light of the station's artificial dawn, Kess wondered what she had truly witnessed unfolding over these past 10 years. Not the slow, doomed struggle of an overwhelmed species trying and failing to earn respect, as she had sometimes feared. Something else entirely. A long, patient wait, calculated and deliberate, for the right moment to reveal a truth the rest of the galaxy was not prepared to hear. Her communicator chimed. A message from a colleague in the Solon Collective's Science Division, someone she trusted for careful, unbiased analysis. "Kess, are you seeing these sensor reports? Multiple outposts along 3 separate approach vectors are reporting the same unidentified fleet signature. Whatever this is, it is not isolated interference. Something very large is moving through this region of space, and moving with remarkable discipline." Kess set down her communicator and looked out at the station's slowly brightening corridors beyond her window, thinking of Elena's message from the night before. "Trust me a little longer. By dawn, everything will be clear." She rose from her seat and began preparing for the council session, moving with more purpose than she had felt in a long while, driven by a growing certainty that today would be unlike any session she had attended in her many decades of service. Elsewhere on the station, in the Drachnol section, Vask found himself unable to sleep, troubled by the sensor reports he had brought to Threx the night before, reports his commander had dismissed too quickly for Vask's comfort. Vask had served under Threx for many years, had fought alongside him in 3 separate border conflicts, and had learned to trust his commander's instincts in almost every situation. But something about yesterday's council session had felt different to Vask, even before the sensor reports began arriving. He had watched Ambassador Voss carefully throughout the exchange, watched the way she absorbed every insult without flinching, watched the strange, quiet confidence in her final words. Vask had spent enough years around soldiers and warriors of every kind to recognize the particular calm of someone who already knew how a coming battle would end. He pulled up the sensor reports again on his personal display, studying them more closely than he had the night before. 3 separate outposts, each reporting brief, inconsistent readings of an enormous fleet signature, always at the very edge of detection range, always gone again before a clear reading could be confirmed. It was, he realized slowly, exactly the kind of pattern he would expect from a fleet deliberately running with advanced stealth technology, revealing itself only in brief flickers as it pushed the very limits of its concealment capabilities across vast distances. The Drachnol had encountered stealth technology before, from a handful of other advanced species, but nothing that could hide a fleet of any significant size from detection at this range. If these readings were accurate, whoever possessed this technology had achieved something remarkable, something far beyond what any known species in this region of the galaxy was believed capable of. Vask thought again of Threx's dismissive words. The humans have 200 ships. The very idea is absurd. He found himself, for the first time in many years of loyal service, seriously doubting his commander's judgment. A knock came at his door. One of his fellow officers, a younger Drachnol named Zeth, stood outside, his expression tense. Vask, you need to see this. Another reading, stronger this time, much closer to the Lumen system. Whatever it is, it's not slowing down, and it's not staying hidden anymore. Vask followed Zeth quickly through the station's corridors toward the Tactical Monitoring Center, his earlier doubts hardening into something closer to certainty with every step. Whatever was approaching this system, it was no longer simply a rumor or a sensor error. It was real, and it was close. As the artificial morning light continued to brighten throughout the Lumen Spire, delegates from dozens of species began making their way toward the Great Council chamber for the day's session, most of them entirely unaware of the growing unease spreading quietly through certain sections of the station. Rumors moved quickly in a place like this, whispered between aides and junior officers long before they reached the ears of senior delegates, but rumors alone rarely disrupted the Council's carefully maintained sense of order and routine. Elena walked the familiar path toward the chamber with David at her side, both of them silent, both of them keenly aware of the small device on her wrist, counting down the final hours until everything changed. She thought of her grandmother's letter, of the years of careful, patient work that had led to this single morning, of Admiral Hale and his crew moving steadily closer through the dark, carrying with them not just ships and weapons, but the accumulated hope of an entire species, finally ready to stand as equals among the stars. "Are you ready?" David asked quietly, as they approached the great silver doors of the chamber. Elena took a slow, steady breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her, not as a burden, but as something closer to purpose finally realized after so many years of patient waiting. "I've been ready for 10 years," she said. The doors opened before them, and together they stepped into the chamber, toward whatever the coming dawn would bring. They mocked Earth at the Council. By dawn, humanity the galaxy froze. When the Terran fleet arrived, the Council chamber filled slowly that morning, delegates arriving one by one through the great silver doors, taking their seats, as they had done countless times before. Ambassador Elena Voss arrived early, taking her place at the small human podium near the back of the room, her expression calm, though her heart beat faster than usual beneath her gray uniform. Councillor Threx arrived not long after, walking with his usual confident stride, flanked by 2 of his soldiers, though weapons remained hidden today under the Council's watchful monitoring systems. He glanced briefly toward Elena, a small, mocking smile touching his reptilian mouth, before taking his seat among the Drachnol delegation. "Good morning, Ambassador," he said, loud enough for nearby delegates to hear. "Sleep well? I imagine such things weigh heavily on a species so concerned with its own survival." "I slept fine, Counselor," Elena said evenly. "Thank you for asking." Presiding Officer Vezek called the session to order, his slow, ancient voice echoing through the great chamber. "This session of the Galactic Council is now in progress. We will begin with routine matters before addressing any new business." The session moved forward much as any other. Trade agreements between the Solon Collective and a smaller neighboring species were discussed and approved. A dispute over mining rights near a contested asteroid field was tabled for further review. Elena listened with half her attention, the other half focused on the small device on her wrist, watching for the signal she knew was coming. Kes, seated across the chamber, glanced toward her more than once, clearly still uneasy from their conversation the night before. Elena offered her a small, reassuring nod each time, though she herself was far from certain how the next few minutes would unfold. Then, exactly as planned, her wrist device pulsed once, a quiet vibration only she would notice. Fleet entering system. Time to arrival at Lumen Spire, 22 minutes. Elena took a slow breath and waited. The routine business of the council continued for several more minutes, oblivious to what was approaching. Then, quite suddenly, alarms began to sound throughout the station, a low, urgent tone that every delegate in the chamber recognized immediately as a system-wide alert. Presiding Officer Vezik paused mid-sentence, his many small eyes blinking rapidly as he received an incoming message through his own communicator. "We are receiving unusual reports," he said slowly, clearly confused. "Station sensors are detecting a massive fleet formation entering the outer edge of the system, unidentified origin." The chamber erupted into murmurs and low, worried conversation. Threx sat up straighter in his seat, his yellow eyes narrowing with sudden interest. "How massive?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. Vezik's antennae twitched as he studied the incoming data. "Sensors indicate this cannot be correct. Sensors indicate a fleet of approximately 4,000 vessels." A stunned silence fell over the chamber. 4,000 ships was an enormous number, larger than most individual species' entire fleets combined, larger even than the full Draknul Dominion military at its peak strength. "Impossible," Threx said flatly. "No fleet of that size could approach undetected. Our sensor network would have picked up any buildup of that magnitude years in advance." "And yet," Vezik said, his voice unsteady for the first time in living memory, "the sensors do not lie, Counselor. The fleet is real, and it is approaching this station directly." Panic began to spread through the chamber. Delegates from a dozen different species spoke over one another, demanding answers, demanding explanations, demanding to know whose fleet this could possibly be. No one had received any warning. No one had any record of any species building a force of this size. Elena remained calm at her podium, watching the chaos unfold around her with quiet patience. "Ambassador Voss," Vezik said suddenly, turning his many eyes toward her. "You have remained remarkably calm during this announcement. Do you know something about this fleet?" The chamber fell silent, every delegate turning to look at the small human ambassador standing quietly at the back of the room. Elena straightened her shoulders and stepped forward slightly, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden hush. "I do, Presiding Officer. That fleet belongs to Earth." For a moment, no one spoke. Then laughter broke out, nervous and disbelieving, spreading through parts of the chamber, though it died quickly this time, uncertain and hollow. "That is not possible," Threx said, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "Your species has 200 ships. We have confirmed this many times, through direct observation and shared reports." "You have confirmed the fleet we allowed you to see," Elena said calmly. "Earth has spent the last 15 years building a second fleet, in secret, far from Council observation. 4,000 warships, Counselor Threx, built and crewed entirely by human hands, arriving now at this station, at dawn, exactly as I promised you yesterday." The chamber erupted into chaos once more. Delegates shouting questions, some standing from their seats, others staring in disbelief at the massive tactical display now projected above the center of the room, showing the enormous fleet formation continuing its steady approach. Threx rose from his seat, his claws gripping the edge of his desk tightly. "This is a bluff," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. "A trick, some clever deception meant to frighten us. It cannot be a genuine fleet." "You are welcome to believe that, Counselor," Elena said, "for as long as it takes them to arrive." The tension in the chamber grew unbearable as the minutes passed, the massive fleet formation on the display drawing steadily closer to the station with each passing second. Delegates from dozens of species watched in stunned silence, their earlier confidence and dismissiveness replaced by a slow, dawning uncertainty that none of them had ever expected to feel in this chamber. Kes leaned forward in her seat, her large black eyes fixed on Elena, with a mixture of shock and something close to admiration. This, then, was what Elena had meant the night before. This was the truth she had not been able to share until now. 12 minutes to arrival, Vezek announced, his voice tight with tension. Threx paced near his seat, his composure cracking further with each passing moment. Contact the fleet, he ordered one of his aides. Demand identification. Demand they explain their intentions immediately. The aide worked quickly at a nearby console, and moments later, a response came through, relayed to the chamber's main display for all delegates to see and hear. Admiral Marcus Hale's voice filled the chamber, calm and steady, carrying an authority that immediately commanded attention. This is Admiral Marcus Hale of the Terran fleet, representing the United Forces of Earth. We are approaching the Lumen Spire on a peaceful diplomatic mission, in direct response to threats made against our homeworld and our ambassador during yesterday's council session. We request only that our fleet be allowed to hold position outside the station, while our ambassador and command staff address the council directly. We seek no conflict with this station, or its occupants, unless conflict is forced upon us. The chamber fell utterly silent as his words finished. Every delegate present understood the weight behind that final sentence, the quiet promise of restraint, paired with an equally quiet promise of consequence, should that restraint be tested. Threx stared at the display, his yellow eyes wide, his earlier confidence completely gone now, replaced by something the old warrior had not felt in a very long time, genuine fear. 7 minutes, Vezek said quietly. Around the chamber, delegates who had laughed at Elena the day before now watched the tactical display with pale, worried expressions, recalculating everything they thought they knew about the small, young, supposedly harmless species from the little blue planet at the edge of known space. Elena remained standing calmly at her podium, watching the fleet's steady approach on the display, feeling, for the first time in 10 long years of quiet diplomacy, patience, and endless small humiliations, a deep and quiet sense of vindication. 5 minutes, Vezek said. Threx turned toward her, his voice low and strained. What do you want, Ambassador? What is the purpose of this show of force? Elena met his eyes steadily. Respect, Counselor Threx. Nothing more, and nothing less. Earth does not seek to conquer this council, or threaten any species who deals with us honestly and fairly. We only wish to no longer be treated as though our voice matters less, simply because our history is shorter than yours. And if we refuse to grant this respect, Threx asked, though the question came out weaker than he clearly intended. Then you will have to explain to the rest of this council, Elena said, why you chose conflict with a species capable of building 4,000 warships in secret over simple, ordinary courtesy. The tactical display chimed softly. 1 minute to arrival, Vezek announced, his voice barely above a whisper now. The entire chamber held its breath. Through the great curved windows lining the upper section of the chamber, a faint light began to appear in the distance, growing steadily brighter with each passing second, until finally, the true scale of the approaching fleet became visible, even to the naked eye. Thousands of ships, sleek and powerful, stretching across the dark of space, in a formation so vast it seemed to blot out the stars behind it. The Terran fleet had arrived. And for the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, the entire chamber fell into complete and total silence, every delegate present, from the proudest ancient empire to the smallest newly admitted species, staring out at the sight of humanity's true strength, finally revealed after 60 years of being underestimated, dismissed, and mocked. Dawn had broken over the Lumen Spire, and the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. In the moments before the shuttle carrying Admiral Hale docked with the station, the chamber remained gripped by a strange, uneasy quiet, the kind of silence that follows a great shock before anyone has fully decided how to react. Delegates who had spent the entire session gossiping and murmuring now sat rigid in their seats, watching the tactical display, watching the window, watching Elena, as though searching her calm expression for some clue about what would happen next. Threx remained standing near his seat, his soldiers flanking him closely, though even they seemed uncertain now, their earlier confident postures replaced by careful, watchful stillness. He had spent his entire career building a reputation as one of the fiercest and most respected military commanders in the Draknul Dominion, a warrior who had never once backed down from a challenge, who had led fleets into battle against species far larger and stranger than his own. He had never, in all his years of service, felt the particular sensation, now settling coldly in his chest. He was afraid. Not of the fleet itself, not exactly. He had faced overwhelming odds before, and survived them through skill and careful strategy. What frightened him was the realization, sudden and complete, that everything he believed he understood about the balance of power in this region of the galaxy had been wrong, and had been wrong for years, perhaps for the entire decade since Earth first joined the Council. He had built his entire approach toward the humans on the assumption of their weakness. Watching that assumption collapse in real time, in front of the entire Council, in front of delegates who would remember this moment for centuries, was a special kind of humiliation he had never before experienced. Vask leaned close to him, his own voice low and urgent. "Counselor, perhaps it would be wise to reconsider our approach before the human admiral arrives." Threk said nothing for a long moment, his yellow eyes still fixed on the massive fleet formation visible through the chamber's windows. Finally, he gave a short, sharp nod. "Nodded, Vask," he said quietly, all trace of his earlier mockery gone from his voice. Around the chamber, other delegates were having similar quiet conversations with their own aides and advisors, rapidly recalculating years of careful diplomatic positioning based on assumptions about Earth's weakness that had just been proven catastrophically wrong. The Solon delegation in particular seemed eager to distance themselves from any earlier comments that might now be seen as insulting, several of their representatives already drafting careful messages to their home government, seeking guidance on how to handle this unexpected shift in the balance of power. Only Kess remained relatively calm, watching the proceedings with quiet satisfaction rather than fear, her earlier faith in Elena finally rewarded with proof she had not fully expected, even after last night's cryptic warning. When Marcus finally walked through the great doors of the chamber, the reaction among the delegates was almost immediate and involuntary. Species who had spent years towering over human representatives both physically and in terms of perceived importance, now watched this single, unremarkable-looking man walk calmly down the center aisle, with something approaching genuine respect, mixed liberally with lingering unease. Marcus was keenly aware of every eye in the chamber following his movement, and he had prepared carefully for this moment during the long journey through the dark of space. He had considered, and rejected, the idea of arriving with an impressive military escort, elaborate ceremonial dress, or any other outward display designed to intimidate further. Instead, he had chosen simplicity, a plain gray uniform much like Elena's own, no visible weapons, no theatrical entrance. He wanted the fleet itself to make the necessary statement about Earth's strength. He wanted his own presence to communicate something different, calm confidence, not aggression. As he took his place beside Elena's podium, he allowed himself a brief glance around the chamber, taking in the mixture of shock, fear, and grudging respect on the faces of delegates who, only yesterday, would barely have acknowledged his existence. The formal exchange that followed unfolded largely as he and Elena had planned during their many late-night strategy sessions over the preceding months, though the actual emotional weight of the moment exceeded anything either of them had fully anticipated. Marcus watched carefully as Vezek, the ancient and normally unshakable presiding officer, struggled visibly to maintain his composure while processing the sheer scale of what had just happened to the balance of power within his council. When the vote finally passed, reaffirming Earth's full membership status, Marcus felt something loosen in his chest that he had been carrying, tightly wound, for nearly 15 years. It was not triumph exactly. It was closer to relief, the particular relief of watching an enormous, carefully guarded secret finally serve the purpose it had been built for, without the catastrophic conflict that had always remained a real possibility throughout the long years of preparation. He thought briefly of all the people who had made this moment possible, and would never stand in this chamber to see it themselves. The engineers who had spent decades of their lives in hidden shipyards, the political leaders who had risked their careers keeping the secret from impatient, frightened populations back on Earth. The countless ordinary citizens who had unknowingly funded, through years of quiet taxation increases justified by other explanations, a fleet they had no idea existed until this very morning. It had cost Earth a great deal to reach this moment. Marcus intended to make sure that cost had not been paid in vain. Beside him, Elena remained standing calmly at her podium, watching the chamber slowly begin to shift around her, watching delegates who had ignored her for a decade suddenly eager for her attention, watching the careful, complicated process of an entire galaxy, recalculating its understanding of a species it had badly underestimated. Dawn had broken over the lumen spire, exactly as she had promised. And everything, finally, had changed. They mocked Earth at the Council. By dawn, humanity the galaxy froze, when the Terran fleet arrived. For a long moment, no one in the Council chamber spoke. The great fleet hung motionless outside the station's windows, thousands of ships arranged in perfect, disciplined formation, close enough now that individual vessels could be seen clearly, their hulls marked with the same simple symbol Elena wore on her shoulder, a circle with a single dot in the center. Presiding Officer Vezek was the first to break the silence, his voice unsteady, in a way that none of the delegates had ever heard from him before. Ambassador Voss, the fleet has arrived and holds position exactly where they said they would. They are requesting permission for a shuttle to dock, carrying Admiral Hale and a small diplomatic party. Grant it, Elena said simply. Vezek hesitated only a moment before nodding to one of his aides, who quickly relayed the necessary clearance codes. Across the chamber, delegates whispered urgently among themselves, some in outright panic, others in stunned disbelief, a few, quietly, in something that almost sounded like relief, that this fleet had chosen words first instead of weapons. Threx remained standing near his seat, his claws still gripping the edge of his desk, his earlier arrogance replaced by a careful, watchful stillness as he stared out at the massive formation of ships beyond the window. 15 minutes later, the great doors at the front of the chamber slid open, and Admiral Marcus Hale walked in, flanked by 4 officers in simple gray uniforms similar to Elena's own. He was not a tall man compared to some species in the room, and he carried no visible weapon, no elaborate ceremonial armor, nothing that marked him as anything more than an ordinary human. And yet, as he walked calmly down the center aisle of the chamber, every single delegate present watched him with an intensity that had been entirely absent the day before. He stopped beside Elena's podium and gave her a small, respectful nod before turning to address the full council. Presiding Officer Vezek, Marcus said, his voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the silent chamber. Distinguished delegates, my name is Admiral Marcus Hale, commander of the Terran fleet. I apologize for the abruptness of our arrival, but given the threats made against Earth and our ambassador during yesterday's session, we felt it necessary to demonstrate, clearly and without further delay, exactly what kind of species you have chosen to threaten. Vezek's antennae twitched nervously. Admiral Hale, this fleet, its existence was entirely unknown to this council. Why was it kept secret for so long? Because, presiding officer, Marcus said, we learned very early in our relationship with this council that strength earns respect in this galaxy, far more reliably than words do. We hoped, for many years, that this would not prove true. We hoped that patience, honesty, and good faith negotiation would be enough to secure Earth a fair and equal place among the species of this council. Ambassador Voss and her predecessors worked tirelessly toward that goal for a decade. He paused, letting his gaze move slowly across the chamber, resting briefly on Threx before continuing. Yesterday, however, made clear that some among you still believe age and size alone determine worth, and that threats against a smaller species carry no real consequence. We built this fleet not because we wished for war, but because we understood that a peace built entirely on hope, with no strength behind it, is not really peace at all. It is simply waiting for the day someone decides to test you. Threx finally spoke, his voice quieter than the chamber had ever heard from him before. You could have destroyed this station, destroyed all of us, easily, the moment your fleet arrived. We could have, Marcus agreed. We chose not to. Because that has never been the point of any of this, Counselor Threx. Earth does not want to rule this galaxy, or punish it, or prove itself through violence. We simply want what every member of this council was promised when it joined: a fair voice, honest treatment, and the freedom to grow without fear of being crushed by someone bigger, simply because they can. Silence lingered over the chamber for a long moment, broken finally by Kess, who rose slowly from her seat, her large black eyes moving between Elena and Marcus, with something like quiet awe. Presiding officer, I move that this council formally reaffirm Earth's status as a full and equal member, with all rights and protections guaranteed under our original charter, effective immediately and without further debate. Seconded, said another delegate, a sullen representative who had said little during the entire proceeding, clearly eager now to align herself with the side that had just proven itself far stronger than anyone had realized. Vezek looked around the chamber, gauging the mood of the assembled delegates. Fear, respect, and calculation mixed openly on many faces. All in favor, he said finally. The vote passed almost unanimously, with only a handful of abstentions among the Draknol delegation, none of them willing to openly vote against it given the circumstances. Threx remained silent throughout the vote, his eyes fixed on the tactical display still showing the massive human fleet holding steady outside the station. Finally, he spoke again, his voice carrying none of its earlier mockery. Ambassador Voss, Admiral Hale, I spoke carelessly yesterday. The Draknul Dominion has no wish for conflict with a species capable of what we have witnessed today. Elena studied him for a long moment before responding. Apology accepted, Counselor Threx. On one condition, that from this day forward, Earth is treated at this table the way every member deserves to be treated, regardless of how long our history is, or how it compares to yours. Not out of fear of our fleet, but out of basic respect. Threx's yellow eyes flickered with something that might have been reluctant admiration. Agreed, Ambassador. You have my word. Then we have no further quarrel, Elena said. Marcus turned to address the full chamber one final time. The Terran fleet will remain in this system for a short time, to allow for proper diplomatic introductions, and to answer any questions the Council may reasonably have. After that, the majority of our forces will return to Earth space. We are not here to occupy this station or intimidate this Council further. We came to be seen clearly, once, and to be believed. I think that has been accomplished. A quiet murmur of agreement moved through the chamber, and slowly, delegates who had never once bothered to speak directly to Elena in 10 years of service began approaching her, offering careful, respectful greetings, asking cautious questions about Earth, about its history, about the fleet that had appeared so suddenly at dawn and changed everything they thought they understood about the galaxy's newest member. Later that day, after the chamber had finally emptied and the initial shock had begun to settle into something more manageable, Elena stood once more at the great window overlooking the Terran fleet, still holding its quiet, disciplined formation outside the station. Marcus joined her there, along with Kess, who had insisted on staying to speak privately with them both. I owe you an apology as well, Elena, Kess said quietly. I should have pushed harder, all these years, for the Council to treat Earth fairly, rather than simply feeling sympathy from a distance. You did more than most, Elena said gently. Kindness matters, Kess, even when it can't fix everything on its own. Kess looked out at the fleet, her expression thoughtful. Do you think this will truly change things? Or will some of them simply grow to fear you instead of respecting you? Elena considered the question seriously before answering. Some, perhaps. Fear is easy, and respect takes longer to earn honestly. But I think, for the first time, we have the chance to build something better than either fear or mockery. A galaxy where a species is judged by its actions and its character, not simply by how many years it has existed. Marcus nodded slowly, watching the fleet drift gently in formation beyond the window, a symbol now of something far larger than simple military strength. It's a start, he said, just a start, but it's more than we had yesterday. Far below them, on a small blue planet many light-years away, billions of people who had spent the last 15 years unaware of the massive secret their governments had carefully protected were only now beginning to learn the truth, watching in astonishment as news feeds around the world showed the incredible images relayed from the Lumen Spire, the site of humanity's hidden fleet finally revealed to the entire galaxy. There would be difficult conversations to come, Questions about secrecy, about trust, about the enormous resources spent in silence over so many years. Earth's own people deserved honest answers, just as much as the Council had. But for now, in this one quiet moment, standing at the window with Marcus and Kess beside her, Elena allowed herself simply to feel the weight of 10 long years finally beginning to lift. Earth had been mocked at the Council. By dawn, the galaxy had learned better. In the days that followed, the story of the Terran fleet's arrival spread quickly across every corner of Council space, carried by traders, diplomats, and journalists from a dozen different species, each version growing a little more dramatic with each retelling. Some accounts exaggerated the size of the fleet even further. Others focused on Threx's public humiliation, turning the proud Drachnol commander into something of a cautionary tale, told to young officers throughout the Dominion about the dangers of underestimating an opponent based on assumptions alone. Back on Earth, the reaction was, as Marcus had predicted, complicated. News of the hidden fleet broke across every major network within hours of the Council session's conclusion, and the response ranged from overwhelming pride to genuine anger at having been kept in the dark for so long. Government leaders who had approved and protected the secret program found themselves facing intense questioning from journalists, from opposition politicians, and from ordinary citizens who wanted to understand exactly how such a massive undertaking had been hidden from public view for 15 years. Admiral Hale himself returned to Earth briefly, several weeks after the events at the Lumen Spire, to testify before a joint session of the newly formed Earth Council, the body that had been quietly coordinating the various national governments' contributions to the fleet program since its inception. He stood before rows of representatives from every major nation, some grateful, some furious, and answered their questions as honestly as he was permitted to. "Why weren't we told?" demanded one representative, an older woman from what had once been called South America, her voice sharp with barely controlled anger. "My constituents have been paying taxes for programs they were told were for infrastructure and disaster relief. Instead, that money built warships." "You're right to be angry," Marcus said simply, not attempting to deflect the criticism. "The decision to keep this program secret was not made lightly, and I understand it, and I still believe it was necessary, and those are not contradictory positions. We faced a genuine risk that any early knowledge of this fleet's existence, even a rumor, could have provoked exactly the kind of conflict we were trying to prevent. Species far older and more powerful than us might have seen a growing human fleet not as a shield, but as a threat requiring a preemptive response. We judged that risk to be greater than the risk of temporarily keeping our own people in the dark. I stand by that judgment, but I also understand if others do not agree with it, and I believe every person affected deserves a full and honest accounting now that the immediate danger has passed." The questioning continued for hours, difficult and uncomfortable in places, but ultimately more productive than either Marcus or Elena, watching remotely from the Lumen Spire, had dared to hope. Slowly, gradually, the anger among much of Earth's population began to shift toward something more complicated: pride, mixed with a determination to ensure that such enormous decisions would never again be made entirely without public knowledge, whatever the diplomatic risks. 6 months after the fleet's arrival at the Lumen Spire, Elena stood once again at her familiar podium in the council chamber, though everything about the experience felt different now. Delegates who once ignored her entirely now sought her opinion on a wide range of matters, from trade regulations to border disputes between other species entirely unrelated to Earth. She had been invited, for the first time, to join a small advisory committee responsible for reviewing the Council's membership charter, a role no human had ever been offered before. Threx, surprisingly, had become something of an unlikely ally in the months since the incident, though their relationship remained formal and carefully professional rather than warm. He had approached her privately several weeks after the vote, in a quiet corridor away from other delegates, and offered what Elena suspected was as close to genuine humility as the proud Drachnol commander was capable of expressing. "I have served this council for over 200 years, he had told her. I have seen many species rise and many fall, and I believed I understood how to judge a civilization's worth within the first few decades of knowing them. I was wrong about your species, Ambassador. I do not enjoy admitting that, but I would rather admit it honestly than continue making the same mistake." "Thank you, Counselor," Elena had replied. "That means more than you might think." Kess, for her part, had become one of Elena's closest allies within the Council, the two of them working together frequently now on diplomatic matters affecting both their species and others. Their friendship, built slowly over years of quiet mutual respect during Earth's difficult early years of membership, had deepened into something that occasionally reminded Elena of the value of patience, even during the long years when patience alone had seemed like it might never be enough. The Terran fleet, meanwhile, had largely returned to Earth space, though a smaller, still impressive contingent remained stationed within Council territory, a permanent and visible reminder of what humanity was now capable of. Admiral Hale had been promoted to oversee Earth's newly reorganized Department of Defense, tasked with the delicate work of transitioning a program built entirely in secrecy into one operating under full public oversight and accountability, a challenge he found, in some ways, more difficult than commanding the fleet itself had ever been. Late one evening, Elena stood once more at the same window where she had waited through that long, tense night 6 months earlier, watching the stars beyond the Lumen spire, thinking about how much had changed since then, and how much still remained the same. Earth still faced enormous challenges ahead, difficult negotiations, lingering resentment from some corners of the Council who had not fully accepted the shift in power, ongoing debates back home about the balance between security and transparency that would likely never be fully resolved. But something fundamental had shifted, something Elena had waited 10 long years to see. Earth was no longer merely tolerated at this table, it was respected, cautiously by some, genuinely by others, but respected all the same, on terms that reflected not simply the size of its fleet, but the character and resolve of the people who had built it, sacrificed for it, and finally revealed it at exactly the right moment. David joined her at the window, as he often did now during the quiet hours after a long day of Council business. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked, waiting to see if it would actually work. "Every day," Elena admitted. "I don't think I'll ever stop being a little amazed that it did." "What happens now?" David asked. "Now that we've proven ourselves, what does Earth do with that, going forward?" Elena considered the question for a long moment, watching the distant lights of the Terran fleet's remaining ships, holding their steady, quiet vigil beyond the station. "Now," she said slowly, "we get to decide who we want to be, without anyone else deciding it for us first. That's all we ever really wanted, David. Not power for its own sake, just the chance to choose our own path, and be judged fairly for the choices we make." Outside the window, the fleet held its silent watch, a symbol now of something far greater than simple military strength, a symbol of a species that had waited patiently through years of mockery and doubt, and had finally, at exactly the right moment, shown the entire galaxy exactly what it was truly capable of. Earth had been mocked at the Council. By dawn, the galaxy had learned better. And as the Terran fleet held its silent, steady watch outside the Lumen spire, a new chapter began, not one of conquest or fear, but of a small, stubborn, resilient species finally taking its rightful place among the stars, on its own terms, at last.